What would you do? You wake up to the sound of bombs. The walls are shaking. Your children are screaming. You live in Gaza, the most densely populated strip of land on Earth. There's no escape. There's no way out. There's no end in sight. You hear the warnings to leave your homes, to go to the refugee zones. But how, you ask? The roads are rubble. People have been shot for trying to move when they weren't allowed, and you've got little kids, a pregnant wife, an elderly parent. How do you carry them through a war zone? And even if you could, you've heard the stories, the safe zones aren't safe. Families are packed into tents, no clean water, no food, no medicine, and the bombs fall there too. So you stay because what choice do you have? As you sit there in the rubble of what used to be your home, holding your kids close, you remember the stories. Stories from your parents about how they were forced from their homes, about the massacres, about what they lost. And you've never seen the places they came from. You're not allowed to. You're trapped here. And still somehow you're the threat. You, a father, a mother, a child. And they say that your dream of freedom, that your very existence is that of terrorism, of hate. You don't want to leave, but you don't want to live like this either. Every time you try to just live your life, you're reminded you're not allowed to. Your life is not your own. Your farmland is taken. The sea is blocked. Your home is a target. Your family, your neighbors, collateral damage. And you've tried everything. Protests, you get shot at. Diplomacy, ignored. Elections, you don't even remember the last time there was an election. Even when you raise your hands in surrender, the bombs fall. And you didn't choose Hamas. You didn't ask for their rule, but they're there, funded by foreign powers, enabled by the very ones who bomb you. And the world sees you as them, but their power isn't yours. But that doesn't matter. You still pay the price. Your children ask, why do they hate us? You don't know what to say. You don't hate them. You've never even met them. You hate what's being done to you, what's being done to your family, but hate? No, you just want to live. And yeah, you know people who do hate. People who say, there's no other choice. We either die fighting or we just die. You don't agree, not really, but you understand them. Because what do you say to someone who's watched their child starve to death or their father be buried beneath rubble? What do you say to someone who's been told that they're a terrorist just because of where they live? What would you do if your whole life was surrounded by walls and drones, and if surrender meant a slow death and resistance meant a quicker one? What would you do when the story of your suffering got edited out of the textbooks and the ones who dropped the bombs wrote that history and wrote it in a way that justified them? Maybe you'd stay silent, or maybe you'd go mad. Maybe, just maybe, you would do something unreasonable. And it's not because you're evil, and not even because you're irrational, but because as the world kept repeating its sins, you finally said, no more.
If Christ is king, how should the Christian consider the kingdoms of this world?
But if we ever hope to combat it, we need to understand what gives birth to it. So I want to talk about Daryl Cooper. Daryl's a Navy veteran. He's an independent historian and the host of the Martyr podcast, which has become one of the most compelling long-form storytelling projects on the internet today. His series, Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem, traces the deep and complex history of Zionism, anti-Semitism, trauma, and identity in both Jewish and Western consciousness. And it's a masterpiece beyond just of history, of nuance and empathy. And it's actually the inspiration for how I opened this episode. I had made an X-post with everything I read sometime in the last 6 to 8 months, and I modeled it after what Daryl Cooper did in the Martyr podcast, how he opened this series. Now, somewhat recently, Cooper found himself at the center of a media firestorm. This was after appearing on on Tucker Carlson's show, and that moment is so infamous that now it's like routinely brought up as a reference point, including during the recent debate between Dave Smith and Douglas Murray. But even then, I think, and we cover this, I remember covering this in high school, but I still don't think we give it enough daylight talking about this. These are the questions that Daryl Cooper wants us to ask. And it's what Scott Horton raised in his conversation with him. And it's something I've even brought up back in episode 58, because the parallels to our time are too obvious to ignore. It seems like people don't want to learn their history. Like I agree with that saying, but then when you get people like Daryl Cooper or Scott Horton or Dave Smith who are like, hey, let's actually dive into the history, and I think we're telling a story about the history that oversimplifies it in ways that we're going to miss things and then repeat those mistakes. Like, oh no, you're because when people feel abandoned, when they feel disenfranchised, when they feel lied to and betrayed by the media, by their elites, they get desperate. And desperate people don't always make noble choices. And that's how evil rises. Not from cartoon villains in back rooms, but from real people in pain, grabbing onto anything that seems like a solution, that seems to offer clarity amidst the chaos. And that's the lesson we need to learn. So I don't know. Does Daryl get 100% of everything right? I don't know who does, right? I'm sure if you listen to, he's got hundreds of hours of podcasts and writings to go through. And I'm sure you can nitpick some things. I've seen a couple things people say that he's gotten wrong or gotten slightly, maybe overemphasizing certain things. But, if we're picking at nits, like we're missing the point. And even when he's getting something wrong, I mean, he's, again, super well researched, and he's always trying to put you in the heads of the people he's talking about. Even though he's a critic, as I am, of Israel's treatment of the Palestinians and of Zionism, his series Fear and Loathing starts out by forcing us to understand Zionism and why the Jewish people were drawn to it. If you really want to understand how Daryl approaches this and why it matters, I challenge you. Go listen to the first 30 minutes of part 1 of Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem. Seriously, just the first half hour. You'll notice the connection immediately. It mirrors the opening of this episode, the slow, deliberate immersion, the moral tension, and the question he forces you to confront, not just about Zionism, not just about Germany or the Arabs, but about every atrocity in history, about every group of people in history who have ever gone through something terrible. And he says, what would you do? That's the question that Daryl never stops asking. Not to excuse, not to glorify, but to understand. Because it's one thing to just give you the facts of history. It's another thing to put you in the place and the minds and the hearts of the people in that history, so you can actually see and feel in your head, be like, I understand how this happened. Didn't just we're not just living in a world where things are out of control. No, that's a world of cause and effect. As I said last week, actions have consequences. And the more you put yourself in the minds and the hearts of the people, even people who find themselves falling prey to evil, despotic men who then bring out the worst in them, who bring out demonic forces that perpetuate some of the worst evils in history. I get real angry, just a little off script here. I really admire people like Jordan Peterson, but Jordan's kind of been on the side lately of criticizing the anti-interventionist, anti-war camp and those who are critical of Israel. But I learned this from Jordan Peterson, what Daryl Cooper's doing. Because Jordan Peterson has said many times that everyone wants to think that they're Oscar Schindler in the middle of the Holocaust, but that you would more than likely be rounding up your Jewish neighbors and reporting them to the SS. That's the truth of the total deprivation of of sin in our hearts, of human nature, that we're cowards and we lack moral strength and clarity when it comes to when we find ourselves in those situations. It's not even just that you'll do it out of fear. It's that you'll be convinced that it's the right thing to do. How does that happen? That's what Jordan Peterson has talked about in the past, and I wish he'd be consistent on that. And that's all Daryl's doing. That's what Scott's doing, and that's what I'm trying to do. Because until we can imagine what it would feel like to be desperate, abandoned, and betrayed, until we feel the gravity of those moments, we'll never truly comprehend the history and how those evil regimes rose. So now let's go back to the story we started this episode with. The father in Gaza, holding his starving child, watching bombs fall, hearing the world call him a terrorist just because he lives in Gaza. Put yourself in his shoes. What would you do? Let's be clear about something. Gaza has been under Hamas's rule and Israeli, occupation for 20 years. I mean, really, the Israeli occupation for longer than that, but the Hamas rule for 20. And that's long enough that most of the population living there today was either born into it or raised under it. Even in 2005, when Hamas first entered the political process, as I said last week, they didn't win a majority, not even close. They didn't win a majority in any of the precincts. And so the story we often hear that Gaza is just Hamas, right? Palestinians are Hamas. It doesn't hold up. The reality is more complicated. And then we add, again, this is just indisputable, that Israel intentionally worked to empower Hamas, to divide and conquer and weaken the Palestinians, to keep Gaza isolated from the West Bank and the Palestinian Authority, to avoid having to pursue a two-state solution or some other solution to give the Palestinians their rights and their liberties. And yet, even after years of blockade and humiliation and starvation and occupation, not every Palestinian was radicalized into violence. And while there's many examples, none is greater to prove my point of this than in 2018, when the people of Gaza organized the Great March of Return, which wasn't a terror attack, wasn't a military intervention, it was a protest. Thousands of civilians, families, teenagers, kids, marched towards the fence separating Gaza from Israel, and they demanded two basic things: end the blockade of Gaza, allow Palestinian refugees the right to return to the homes they were driven from in 1948. And how did Israel respond? With snipers, with live ammunition, with tear gas and mass shootings. Over 200 Palestinians were killed, many shot in the legs, many left permanently disabled. Just thousands more than the hundreds that were killed were wounded, and the world barely blinked. So when people say that Palestinians only understand violence, they just hate Israel, they're just it's a death cult that wants to destroy the Jewish people. No, that is not all the Palestinians, and many of them have tried protests. They've tried diplomacy. They've tried elections. Every peaceful door has been slammed shut. Every attempt at nonviolent resistance has been met with bullets and bombs and silence from the so-called civilized world. So what would you do? That's not a rhetorical question. It's the moral heart of this entire episode. If you have kids and you understand how tragic that is, you just put yourself in that position. Imagine that you're a father and you just had a bomb dropped on your house and you are the only one left, and you're sitting there looking around at the blown up bits of your family, and you tell me you can't understand how you could get radicalized into violence at that moment. The fact that some didn't is just a testimony to that. Even though we are sinful, even though we are totally depraved, that we aren't always as depraved as we could be. Again, what would you do? It's not a rhetorical question. If we can't ask that question, if we can't entertain the humanity of the people that we're bombing, then we're not serving the kingdom of God. We're serving the kingdoms of this world. And here's the deeper reality. Both sides of this story, the Jews and the Palestinians, have been through hell. The intro to Fear and Loathing in the New Jerusalem is about the anti-Semitism and the pogroms that the Jewish people suffered in Eastern and Western Europe before and after World War I in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Really for a long time before that. The Jewish people have been through so much hell. And the criticism that Daryl and I have for Zionism is essentially that, like, yeah, after a while, the Jewish people got tired of that and decided, like, they're going to have a homeland and they're going to do it at any cost, even if it means displacing Arabs from Palestine. Like they said that explicitly. That's not revisionist history at all. That is fact. But listen, this isn't about picking one victim and one villain. It's about recognizing that trauma runs deep on both sides, that the fear, the pain, the desperation that drives people to terrorism or to resistance, that didn't spring out of nowhere. And Daryl Cooper, not Scott Horton and not Dave Smith and not me, we're not revisionists who are trying to make you hate Churchill and love Hitler. We're trying to do something much harder, something much more important. We're trying to see the humanity in every group of people, to force us to understand that the forces that drive nations, movements, and individuals towards decisions that from the outside look insane or monstrous, to understand that, like, that could be us. To understand what those forces are and to be able to be like, that could be me. And also because if we believe Jesus's words, and we're going to obey them, right? We're going to follow them. That means loving our neighbor and our enemy. That's not optional. If we only see good guys and bad guys, we'll never understand history and we'll never be fully capable of loving anyone outside of our own tribe.